Welcome to 2025. Oh my gosh. Sorry for the delay on this video. Things have been very crazy. But before we get into anything 2025 on this channel, today is dedicated to 2024. So we're going to go over my review of all my stats in reading. I've officially taken the data. So let's... Bloom! 2024 in review. First off, I read 247 books, which is surprisingly not as much as I usually do. But we had a lot going on. A lot happened this year. So yeah, only 247. I didn't even break 250. Crazy. That equals 91,311 total pages and 1,975 and a half hours of audiobook, because boy, did I listen to audiobook. I had a 3.9 average rating for all 247 books, which is not shabby, if I do say so myself. And my BPM, my books per month average, was reading about 20 and a half books every month, which again, a lower number than usual for me. For me, people. I acquired 215 books, which I have to say, like, my game worked, even though that seems like a really big number. Last year, I acquired, like, over 500. So, I think almost 600 last year. So, I did pretty good curbing myself. And that's just acquired. That's not necessarily bought. That's just, that came into the library. And I have read 43 of those. So 20% of the books that I brought in this year, I have read. Not great, but I guarantee you last year's was worse. I bet last year was single digit. And 50 of those books were acquired in July. So I acquired the most in July, which makes sense because that's my birthday. When I can get books and when people get me books. So I guess you couldn't see that it says July, but it's there. Some of these might get cut off. I'm sorry if I don't pay attention to both screens. All right. We're going to talk about the top genres. Not surprising at all. Fantasy. And these are the main genres, by the way. They're not combined genres, so these could be anything from fantasy sci-fi, fantasy romance, fantasy historical, fantasy literature. There's a lot of different ones. But overall, I read 144 fantasy books. In second place was romance. 27 books with the predominant category of romance. 27. And then surprisingly in third place usually belongs to sci-fi. But this year, horror took it by 1. Horror took it by 15, or took it at 15. Sci-fi only read 14. So that's quite shocking to me as someone who is not a horror fan. But yeah, those are my top 3 genres. Formats. Let's look at that. Audio, not surprising. 66.8% of the books that I read in 2024 were audiobook. And yes, audiobooks are reading. And if you think otherwise, skedaddle. Bye-bye. Okay. Then, the biggest shock is my least favorite format was ebook, but second place. 17% of the books I read were ebooks. Granted, I started NetGalley hardcore this last year, so... makes a little more sense. And then in physicals, I read 40. 16.2% were physicals, which surprisingly, I think only a few of them were hardcover versus paperback, because I do normally track it. I think it was like only 6 hardcovers were physically read this year, and the rest were paperback. It was wild. Audience breakdown. I have changed. Something has changed within me. I've been reading more adult. 50.2% books were adult this year, and 35.7% were YA, with only 4% being middle grade, which is wild. I'm usually much more of a YA reader, but I definitely think in the past few years, adult has been dominating what I'm reading. I'm changing. It's fine. It's normal. But yeah, we're fully into our adult era. Crazy. Authors! Let's talk about some authors. I read 49.8% of the books I read this year were authors that I already knew and loved, maybe. And then 42.9% were new to me but had previously published. And then 7.3% were debut authors. Would like to move that number up. I'd like to get double digits with debut, but we'll see. Publication-wise, most were read from 2024. I read 60 from 2024 releases, and that's not the acquisitions thing. This is mostly because of NetGalley and trying to stay on top of that. And 51 of them were from Macmillan, from the big name publishers. Macmillan won by a landslide. I think Penguin and HarperCollins were in the 30s, which is crazy. But Macmillan is not the number one publication, publishing house, I guess. In terms of my spreadsheet, it's self-pub and indie. I read 55 self-pub and indie. 33 officially were self-pub, though, and 22 were indie, but they get categorized together. All right, series. My series breakdown. I completed 19 series. Could be better. Up to publication, though, I read 32. So technically, that's 51 and 20.7% of the books I read are completed up to publication at least. I'm in progress of 75, but also technically the up to publications count to that too. Oopsies. And then I did DNF 19 series. I decided not to continue them. And the rest, obviously those numbers don't add up to 100. That's because the rest were standalones. Okay. Let's look at our map here. I read the most from fictional worlds. 94 of them were for fictional worlds. And then the US with 72 books. The UK with 36 books. And then China and France getting 4 books each. Surprising. But I feel like this map is a lot broader than I have done in the past. I'm like, hey, look at that. I've got African countries. Hardly ever get any good books from, not good books. Hardly get any books advertised to me from those countries. You have to really actively seek them out. I've got a decent smattering here. I'm surprised I had 0 from Canada, though. That's kind of shocking. None set in Canada and none set in Australia. I've read Australian and Canadian authors, but they were fictional lands, clearly. I don't have any from South America either, it doesn't look like. So resolutions for the new year. Read more there. If we're looking at the U.S. breakdown, because so many of them were, California, of course, won with 12. New York with 10. Everyone sets their freaking books there. Stop setting books in California and New York, everybody. I hate reading them. I want to read other states. Look how many blank states I have. Someone said something in Minnesota. Why not? Then second place we got Colorado and Washington. 5 books each there, and then Oregon with 4. Look at all these blank states. So many. You guys need to start setting books in these other states, because I want to fill out this map. Oops, let me just. Blah, blah, blah. Big versus smalls. Okay, the biggest book I read, page count, was Midnight Sun. 756 pages. But at the last second, the longest audiobook I listened to was Queens of Innislayer by Tessa Gratton at 26 and a half hours. Midnight Sun's 26 hours. Suck it. And the smallest book I read was 91 pages, which was A Thief in the Night by K.J. Charles. And the shortest audiobook I listened to was Macbeth, which was 2.5 hours. It was the full production of the play. The author I read the most was Tycho. I read 8 of Tycho's books. Not all of them are published, but I did read a lot of Tycho. I finished the Brady series. I read Court of Snakes. I read King of Dust. And then I've read 2 others of Tycho's that are not published. One of them is on Wattpad right now. Right? Yeah. And then the other one's going to be, which is Court of Snakes 2. Because I got to alpha read those. And then for audiobook narrators, we had ties. We had Caitlin Davies, Emily Wuzeller, and Christopher Raglan with 4 of them. Sorry, I don't know where to put myself. I should put myself up here. Maybe if I go up here, it won't be in the way. Whatever. So I read the most from them. Woo! Not surprised. Emily Wuzeller, I'm not surprised. I read a lot of books that just happen to have her as the audiobook narrator. Caitlin Davies, so it was a little surprising. I usually get like 1 or 2. And Christopher Raglan, yeah. All right, we're looking at our monthlies. What months were the most and least of what? So, the book I read the most books in, was June. I read 28 books in June. And November, I read the least. which was 12 because I was doing litmus prep, so I didn't get to read a lot. The most 5 stars was March and October. I had 7 5-stars each there, and I didn't have any in August and September. So I was in a bad slumpy time in August and September. And then for some series completed, I completed the most in July with 6, and then I didn't complete any series in February, March, or December. Shame on me. The gayest month of the year was aptly June. I read 9 books which had queer protagonists in them. So, yay, Pride Month. I don't even know if I was actively trying to in June. I just happened to. I have a lot of gay books. And then the book, I didn't want to be like the most disabled month, but the most, I tracked disabled protagonists. So the month that had the most that I read was March, with 9. 9 is a magic number, apparently. NetGalley stats. I received, this is technically sort of incorrect, but I couldn't figure it out. I received 145 overall this year. I did have some at the very end of 2023 carry over, but I'd only barely started NetGalley at the end of 2023, so I'm counting them anyway. So I have 145. I read 50 of them, which only makes my ratio at 34%. Which is not great. NetGalley wants you to have an 80% ratio, just FYI. But hopefully, right now, with my current TBR, we will knock that baby up. Oh, that sounded weird. Okay. Pre-order stats. Okay, so if you guys remember the Egg Hunt, pre-order Egg Hunt, these are the books that I was allowed to pre-order. And I've only read 4 of them. Read 4 of them. I read The Pairing. I didn't quite like it. I read Haunted Ever After. I did like it. I read Somewhere Beyond the Sea, and I did like that. And Air, which I also did enjoy. I need to read the rest. Okay. Now, a little bit of an award show. I have chosen the best and worst of each genre instead of doing the best book of the year, because we've kind of already discovered that from figuring out what my favorite book of all time is, because it is one of these books. And it was the number 1 book in that, so we don't need to do that. And we all know what the worst book would be, which was Midnight Sun. But the best classic that I read this year was Beauty and the Beast with 4 stars. I didn't have a 5-star classic. I didn't read many classics this year. And the worst one was Macbeth, which I gave 2.5 stars. I don't, it's not my favorite Shakespeare-y, okay? Contemporary. Best contemporary I read was The Remarkable Journey of Coyote Sunrise by Dan Gemeinhart. Gemeinhart. E-I in German. I. Anyway, it's a middle grade, and it's fantastic. It's very emotional, but it's got a great cast of characters. I really enjoyed this. And the worst contemporary I read was The Taming of the Shrew, which I gave 2 stars. This is a Taming of the Shrew retelling. Normally I like Stephanie Kate Strom stuff. Did not vibe with this one. I was not, nope. Best fantasy was Unmasked, which is my current favorite book, apparently, according to the bracket fight that we had. But Unmasked by Ken Vermeer. This is an indie. Highly recommend this. It's autism spectrum representation. It's fantastic. The worst fantasy I read, though, of course, actually, no, not of course, but it was Sanctuary of the Shadow. I gave this 1 star by Aurora Asher. Hated this. This was awful. Ugh! Plot where? What's a plot? Don't know. And apparently, neither did this book. The best historical I read was The Warm Hands of Ghosts by Catherine Arden. I absolutely loved it. It was so good. And the worst historical I read was The Prisoner of Heaven by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. Not like worse is an awful, obviously. I gave it 3 stars. I didn't read a ton of historical. It was just the one I was the least connected with in all of them. And I only had 2 historicals with 3 stars. And I liked this one less than the other one. So there you go. All right. Horror. The best horror I read was Don't Let the Forest In by C.J. Drews. I absolutely am in love with this book. Very psychological horror with some other elements to it, but it's fantastic. And the worst horror I read was The Bad Ones. Not that it was really bad. I just was kind of meh about it. So I only gave it 3 stars. Best and worst literary fiction, which I, again, did not read a ton of literary fiction, but Tomorrow, Tomorrow, and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin got 4 stars for me, even though I really didn't like it all that much. I think it's actually supposed to be like 3.5 or something, but I put the 4-star marker on that. It was fine. I had a lot of issues with it, especially at the end. And the worst I read was Boy Snow Bird by Helen Oyeyemi. 1 star, unnecessary transphobia at the end. Moving on to magical realism. I only read like 3 magical realism. No, I read a few more than that. But magical realism, the best one I read was Flawless Girls by Anna Marie Miclemore. Anna Marie Miclemore is kind of like the #1 superior writer for all things magical realism. I love their work so much. The worst one I read was All the Crooked Saints. Again, not awful. It gave it 3 stars. Just not as good as the other ones I read. Best and worst mystery. The best mystery I read was Some Shall Break by Ellie Marney, the sequel to None Shall Sleep. I love this trilogy. I have heart palpitations for the 3rd book coming out this year. And the worst one I read was The Thursday Murder Club. Again, not awful, just not my vibes. 3 stars. Nonfiction, I literally read 2 books. So the best one was The Girl with 7 Names by Hyung-Soo Lee, which is a North Korean defector story. Absolutely loved it. And then the worst one I read was, just kidding, they're both 5 stars, White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. They both got 5 stars for me. But I would say I was more into Girl with 7 Names than I was White Fragility, because there was like one line or one concept in White Fragility that I disagreed with. And that was about a liberal white woman being the most dangerous to black. I didn't totally agree with that. I got where they were going with it, but it was a weird line that I was like, I don't think that's necessarily true in terms of the safety of a black person. Like the actual physical safety, you know? But I get where they were going. Otherwise, it's a fantastic book and highly recommend it. Romance! The best romance I read this year was A Witch's Guide to Fake Dating a Demon by Sarah Hawley. I love this book so much. It's so funny. It brought back the rom-com-ness of stuff, even with the smutty scenes. It was funny, and I loved it. I loved it a lot. You guys are just going to have to deal with Squeaky. All right, the worst one I read, obviously, was Midnight Sun. We don't need to talk about that. It was awful. All right, the best and worst sci-fi. The best sci-fi I read was Paradise 1 by David Wellington. I really love Paradise 1 a lot. I still haven't read Revenant X yet. I'm scared to. But I love Paradise 1 so much. The worst one I read was Rake's Fall by Vajra Chandrasekhara. I don't actually know where this was sci-fi. It's categorized as sci-fi. It's weird. And I didn't understand it. This was not a book for my brain. I felt very stupid reading it. So 2 stars. Graphic novel. Best graphic novel is, of course, Heartstopper Volume 5. I love Heartstopper. It's just good stuff. I also did not read a ton of graphic novels, but I did have a worst, and that was Sandman Book 1. This was even before the Neil Gaiman controversy came out. I just really don't like Sandman. I don't like this book. I also didn't know it was like a DC thing, and it had like DC superheroes in it. I thought it was its own universe, but it actively has DC superheroes in it. But overall, there's a lot of things in this that I just do not like, and I felt were unnecessary, so that's why. Best and worst novella. The best novella I read was A Thief in the Night by KJ Charles. This was just so fun. These guys are idiots, and I love them. And the worst one I read was Counterweight by Juna. I wanted to like this. I had a really interesting concept. It just missed me on everything. It could have been so much better. I feel like if this wasn't a novella and it got to expand on the characters a lot more, then I would have enjoyed it a lot. But otherwise, I hated these characters and I hated everything about it. Audiobook. The best audiobook experience that I had was with Small Miracles by Olivia Atwater. It's so funny because it has these little notes that kind of chime in on the audiobook. And literally there's a little chime thing. And it adds to the comedic timing and it makes the experience in reading this book so much more fun. It's so good. And then the worst audiobook I read was Midnight Sun because it was so freaking long! How many times did we have to mention how soft and weak she was? Props to Jake Abel, though. Props to him for doing that. But dear God, I hate this book so much. Okay, we don't need to talk about it anymore. Alright, finally we're talking Herkyed. This is my current board. Going into the new year for the second half of Herkyed, I have finished 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of the 25 squares, which is actually kind of sad. I'm close to finishing a bunch of others, though. I'm like halfway through this. I need one more for this. I need, I think, 1 or 2 more for the blurb. I'm close on... I'm about to finish another one for Spiffbo. I can't believe I haven't done the webcomic yet. I just haven't done it. I'm about to do the recipe. I'm still waiting for my book for my birth year to drop on my Libby app. It's been on hold for literal months now. So we're close to filling in more of these guys, but that's where I am at with that. That's all, folks. That's my 2024 stats. What are your thoughts? Where do you think I'm going to end up in 2025? Do you think I will have more or less? I'm kind of gauging to have less, just because I am going to be focusing so much more on writing this year. I'm going to do it. I'm saying that on camera. I'm focusing on writing, Q. That's what you're doing this year. You're not focusing on reading anymore this year. Do your writing. It's my morning mantra I have to say to myself every day. Okay, well, anyway, that's the stats of 2024. This year's gonna be crazy. Punctuated by a lamb chop. Did you already make a hole in lamb chop? We just got that today. We just bought lamb chop. Oh my goodness. Anyway, all right. Well, that's it. That 2024, here we come. Oh, 2024. 2025, here we come. Let me know your guys' stats, or if you've made like a stats video thing, link it, because I want to watch it. I love watching stats, and I love watching people's reading experiences. We all have very different ones, and no matter if you read less or more than me, whatever you read for you is amazing, and I'm just intrigued. Especially if you have like a little like, here's your best book, here's your worst book. I am intrigued to know stuff. I'm a nosy girl. Okay, I like to know. I'm a nosy girl. See how big it is? That's because I'm nosy. That's why I want all the hot goss in your reading life. Okay, I'm gonna go now. I will see you next week, cuties. Bye! First these 2025. Woo! Dude, what do you have? No. Why? Why steal? No. That's a white. Stop stealing from the garbage. Was Queens of Innislear by Tessa... Sir? Literal... And Air by Saboteur. Really? 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 A Triceratops? A badly wounded Triceratops? Look at this. Look at that. He's falling to pieces. We'll play with it over there. Overall. Anna Marie Micklemore is kind of... Buddy, can you chew on something else? Can you chew on something else? Please? Please? I'd like to finish this.